Lego Star Wars. No, not that one. No, not that one either. Ah, this is the one we're looking for. The original release of LEGO Star Wars released on the 29th of March in 2005, with the game tracking positive reception, which would help extend the series onwards with many various releases from the Star Wars franchise and many others. Over the years, LEGO Star Wars would grow as a speed game, now boasting close to 1,000 runs on the leaderboard. Personally, I've always seen this speed game as one of the most underrated going around, showcasing many impressive tricks, which creates a unique divide between what you would normally see in a regular playthrough versus what you will see here today. In this video, I will be running through the any% speedrun using two players' runs who have both acquired a time below 1 hour. The first player is known as Weed, and she is the current reigning world record holder. The second player goes by the name of Saiyanz, but I will be calling him Saeed for short. Saeed is currently in second place, currently sitting 40 seconds behind Weed. The reason I've decided to incorporate two runs rather than one is that since Weed's world record, there has been a few new developments in the run, showcasing cool new tricks which are now used in the category today. Also, at the end of the video, I will show additional new strategies which neither of these two players use in their current PBs, but are now viable in the run. This run will showcase many game breaking glitches, so if you are a purist and would prefer to see a more traditional style playthrough, I would highly recommend the Glitchless world record by Hydrus. To break down some basic information about this speedrun, the 80% category is defined as completing the game as fast as possible with minimal to no restrictions. The minimal restrictions that are often applied are rule sets made by the community to help make the speedrun more balanced and accessible. Due to the PC version having superior load times and close to no lag, we will only focus on the rule sets for the PC port. The main three rules I want to highlight in this run is that it must be done on 60 FPS, as 60 FPS is the native frame rate of the game, and running at any higher can cause inconsistencies in the logic of the game. Secondly, launches are banned from the game. To quickly explain, it's a trick which relies on intentionally lagging a game to be able to clip through walls, kinda similar to how Simpsons Hit and Run time skip works. As this trick is hardware dependent, the community voted against allowing this trick. Lastly, the game is designed to work seamlessly with two players at any time, so a player is allowed to control both players on his own, which allows for many specific strategies to be possible. With that out of the way, let's get started. This is how LEGO Star Wars has been in under an hour. Enjoy. The timer starts when selecting the new game option at the main menu. When arriving in Dex's diner, Weed heads to episode 1 The Phantom Menace and enters the first level called Negotiations. Skipping past the 42-second cutscene, we start the run by using the force on the door and double jumping down the hallway, avoiding as many laser bullets as possible, aiming to get to TC-14 without dying. Now that we have reached TC-14, the first trick in the run will be performed. By pushing TC-14 towards the switch, then quickly swapping to them and activating the switch, we avoid the tutorial cutscene from playing, saving 3 seconds. We will now see the first use of two controllers one player, where Weed takes control of Qui-Gon, moving him to the door, whilst TC-14 activates the switch. Right after opening the door, Weed disconnects the second controller and switches to Qui-Gon. She then uses the least amount of force to move the barrier, removing collision and allowing Qui-Gon to walk straight past. Okay, we need to now pause for a minute as I explain to you this next trick, as this is the main trick done in the speedrun. Transition skips have been a trick used for many years now, with many various results which I will explain throughout the run. But by pushing the non-active player past the room transition and then switching to them, you are able to avoid the transition for the room change, and then you are able to move out of bounds. There are various approaches you could take once out of bounds, but the common method used, like you will see here, is falling underneath the floor and running past all enemies and obstacles to your next desired location, commonly a scene or room transition. In Negotiations, the objective is to head straight to Qui-Gon's ship and clip back in bounds inside the ship, hitting a very small hitbox for the scene transition, completing the level right away. Cutting ahead to the next level, Invasion of Naboo, the level starts off pretty straightforward, double jumping ahead, using the force to move past barriers, as well as defeating the small sets of enemies by doing a precise double jump attack, defeating majority with one move. After meeting the Sith Lord himself, we switch to Jar Jar Binks, as his movement speed is faster, as well as his jumping height. Weed activates two players for the second time, using Obi-Wan to apply the force to make the platform, whilst Jar Jar continues to move towards the platform. Once the platform is made, he then turns off the second player. In this next area, you would commonly switch between the Jedi's force ability and Jar Jar's jumping height to help reach the height of the following stone platform. However, with a well-timed double jump, you are able to clear each gap, skipping the need for the Jedi. Once at the last platform, Weed jumps onto a very specific spot against the wall, where a small part of the hitbox is extended out from the Lego piece below, which then allows her to double jump to the platform to the right. After squeezing into another small gap against the wall, and performing another precise double jump, Weed is now able to move on to the next area. Repeating the same concept from the last room, Weed performs an incredibly precise double jump, avoiding the need to use the Force on the wooden platform, which also keeps the Jedi in place for an upcoming wrong warp. Not long after, she uses Jar Jar to precisely jump from the droid tank ship to a hitbox at the top of the tree, which then allows her to jump out of bounds. Now I'm quickly pausing again, as I now need to explain how wrong warping works in this game. The way wrong warping works is by tricking the game to load in a specific area of the game, which changes all room transitions to the area most recently loaded in. For Invasion of Naboo, by using Jar Jar and jumping over the wall, you end up loading in the final room of the level, which activates all triggers to transition to the final area. By landing back in bounds and then activating player 2, the second player is then able to move back to the room transition as the earlier platform jump was done, forcing the AI to stay back where the transition is, allowing us to then walk through the transition and load the final area. Quickly switching to Saeed's PB, we see a new strategy used in the last area, where he is able to spawn Qui-Gon into the scene transition, saving time running down the final strip. Now starting the third level, Escape from Naboo, we see Weed perform a first trick right away called Pixel Jump. Can you see how there's an open gate above Princess Amidala? Well, the hitbox on the fence extends all the way down to the floor, so by walking into the collision of the fence, we are able to then infinitely jump until we break out of the collision. The next few areas play out per normal, destroying bombs and using your special ability to reach higher areas. After falling down, we will see another cool trick performed, where Weed will hit all 4 targets on one rising platform. The level ends pretty straightforward, shooting a glass cover away and jumping into the scene transition. This level would be a community gold, which in short means the fastest ever performance of this level. Mos Espa Podrace is essentially a 5.5 minute auto-scroller, so I want to quickly mention that if you are interested in learning the speedrun, feel free to follow the link below, which has tutorials and guides available for new players. Skipping past the cutscene, we arrive at Retake Theed Palace, where Weed goes straight into 2 players and heads to the ramp, aiming to use the Force and build the ramp up before dying. Unfortunately, the strat does fail, but she succeeds straight after respawning. Weed would continue to use 2 players in the following room, using both Jedi's Force powers to allow the AI to follow afterward. Right after that, Weed turns off 2 players and switches to Padme, as she can output damage more efficiently, defeating the droidicas before the shield bursts up, and defeating the remaining droids as well. After traversing the hallway, Weed turns on 2 players again to unlock the door, whilst keeping Obi-Wan as close to the room transition as possible. Reverting back to 1 player, we will see the next use of the transition skip. Starting off, the player is pushed past the transition, then switched to. After walking around some odd collision, Weed doubles back towards the pillar on the right. After walking around more collision, she is finally near the pillar, where she has to do very precise movement. Located here is the death plane, which means if any player lands in this space, they will automatically die. The floor, which is the surface used to navigate on, and the railing, which also extends inside the pillar and is used as a surface to walk off. By walking off the extended part of the pillar, which begins our descent into the void, then clipping back into the floor, we are then out of bounds and able to navigate underneath the floor like normal. The trick is very precise, as it's very easy to fall into the death plane, as well as back onto the railing, which can make the player be stuck in place. We then continue traversing through the room, clipping back inbounds behind the door, and hitting the room transition, which also skips a cutscene. Another out of bounds is used right away, this time precisely double jumping to the right, where you can land on a high enough plane to run close to the floor instead of falling all the way down. Weed will then move to a precise position where the platform above's hitbox is extended slightly behind the wall, which then makes it possible to pixel jump up to the higher area where Weed is, then able to walk around the room transition, completing the area. After dodging a death from the droidica, we now arrive in the final room, where many awesome tricks are done here. Starting off, Weed turns on 2 players, having the main player be a Jedi and the second player be a shooter. Using Padme to jump onto a small block piece, then using Qui-Gon's Force ability, you are then able to jump up to the higher platform where the first pilot is. Right after, Weed positions Padme in a very specific location, where she is able to shoot the droid guarding the second pilot. After turning off 2 players, Weed takes a particular route, platforming up small pillars on the wall to reach the third and fourth pilot. After quickly saving the final 2 pilots, Qui-Gon is moved to a particular position, which allows the AI to respawn near the switch when turning back on the second player. After quote Weed's best ever episode 1, she would then return back to Dex's diner. The reason for that is process of elimination. Due to the timing of the speedrun ending at the completion of the last level, one of the 3 credit scenes is not timed in the speedrun. As episode 1 comes in the longest at 1 minute and 25 seconds, the final level of episode 1 is left for the end of the run. Skipping to the start of the level, Weed moves Obi-Wan towards where the bridge would form, whilst moving R4-P17 towards the top platform area. Weed then moves Obi-Wan off the edge, whilst dropping out, which then allows Weed to fly R4 deeper into the ocean. The reason this is done is to do a trick known as drop warping. In simple terms, by dropping out Obi-Wan as he is dying, he has then died off camera. By then extending yourself further away from where the death took place, the game has to approximate where he originally was. By spawning Obi-Wan back in after R4's death, you are then at the platform to the next area. Following up, we will see a transition skip done in the third room, pushing Obi-Wan past the room transition and running underneath. You can now see there is a duplicate of Obi-Wan running upside down. This is due to the reflective visual effects. This next trick can be quite precise, and it is very easy to hit the room transition incorrectly, which can spawn you back in the same room with a cutscene included. However, we performed the trick correctly by landing on the switch, then moving down right, which hits the left side of the room transition. Using another transition skip right away, we are able to skip a cutscene, droid fight, barrier fight, and lastly 3 room transitions saving over 30 seconds. As Weed is running down the walkway, she is jumping on an angle to continue forward without hitting the bomb's hitbox. Once at the bridge, 2 players are turned on and the switch is activated whilst moving Obi-Wan towards the door. After dropping out the second player, Weed does a very precise double jump attack, which hits the room trigger early, not having to wait for the lift to rise up. In the next room, Weed runs to the end of the hallway and uses the force to wedge herself into the collision of the bricks. After an intentional death, she respawns inbounds for a frame, then the following frame is inside the collision, which gives her enough downward speed to clip out of bounds and into the scene transition for the Jango Fett battle. This fight is scripted to go mostly the same way every time, so this battle is very choreographed, moving to the predicted positions to quickly counter Jango's missiles. The last attack is quite precise, as missing it can cause a lot of time chasing him back down. Right away, Weed switches to Padme, using her effective damage output to clear enemies whilst running down the first hallway. Switching back to Anakin, Weed proceeds to double jump along the edge of the platform, avoiding the runway, which slows down your movement speed. When reaching the end of the platform, Weed runs straight into the wall as there is no collision on the front of the wall and is then able to pixel jump up to the room transition above. In the next room, 2 players are turned on to effectively multitask the puzzle efficiently. Moving R2-D2 to the rim of the moving pot, you are then able to jump off onto a higher platform where R2 is not meant to be. Flying to the end of the room, Weed moves R2 into a specific location and uses his ability, which miraculously works with all the bombs blocking the way. I will speed through this room quickly as nothing interesting happens here. After forming the bridge in the following room, Anakin commits episode 3 spoilers by jumping into the lava. Once across the other side, he successfully spawns R2 out of thin air and activates a switch. A second drop-in warp is used right away to spawn C-3PO next to the switch. Now entering the final room, Weed performs a slash attack with Anakin and drops him out just before hitting the room transition. After dropping out player 2, Weed begins traversing along the edge of the floor. Once she reaches this exact position, she is bumped into an invisible wall and now has to carefully move around it. Once at the other side, she then has to double jump. The double jump animation is cut short as she lands into a piece of collision, resetting her jump again, and allowing her to reach the edge of the map, which allows the level to be completed without being hit by enemies. This is considered as one of the hardest tricks of the game, as you are mostly doing this trick blind. The level starts off with you controlling Mace Windu, and your objective is to defeat every droid, super droid, and droideka which are guarding Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Padme. Weed does 2 very precise slam attacks, breaking the droideka's shield, whilst also defeating the 2 red droids. Mace Windu's moveset is not very efficient, so the best way to defeat enemies is by deflecting their own lasers. This of course is not the easiest thing to do, as deflects only work whilst pressing the attack button as the laser is being shot at you. In the Anakin area, another slam attack is done to break the shield of the droidekas, then proceeds to deflect all the lasers back at the enemies. Lastly, in Padme's area, a bomb is triggered so it can defeat the droideka off to the left, whilst Mace Windu can focus on the remaining droids to the right, breaking their shields, then deflecting their lasers. This part of the level is basically called hide and seek, as you are required to find the red coloured droids and super droids. These enemies can spawn in randomly, but the way Weed approaches this is by moving to the left and taking out the red droids as she sees them. Once reaching this gated area, she quotes you should be able to find 5 droids by this point. However, the last droid will either spawn further to the left or behind you. The second wave spawns are much more random. Starting off, when spawned in, you should be relatively close to a super droid, so Weed starts by finding the first super droid and clearing the remaining red droids around them. The second super droid can be annoying to find. Luckily, Weed got fortunate enough and found him right away. She then heads right, hoping to find the last 2 droids, which eventually ends up happening. The cutscene for Jango initiates, and you are going to witness the fastest boss fight in this run. By running towards the wall and initiating the bomb, Jango will continue following you, flying directly into the bomb's hitbox. The developers of the game missed an insight with the bombs. Bombs do not deal a specific amount of damage, but instead defeat any enemy or ally within its hitbox radius. This applies to Jango Fett as well, allowing Weed to defeat the boss instantly. Moving along to the next level, Gunship Cavalry, this level is a very unique one, which has the player controlling a gunship confined to the space on screen. The level starts out pretty simple, slowly moving your way through the level. At the midway point in the level, Weed intentionally flies off the edge and dies, which then skips her further ahead to the next checkpoint, saving a few seconds. I am now going to skip ahead, as nothing else interesting happens in the area of the level. Switching over to Saeed's footage, we see a new method used in the final battle, where he activates 2 players just before entering the final area. By using 2 players, you are able to output double the damage, making it quicker to break the shields and destroy the energy transformers, saving 1 second. Starting off in Count Dooku, Weed switches to Anakin and chases him into the building. Somewhat similar to the skip done in Kamino, Weed jumps onto this cylinder and uses the force to fall out of bounds, which allows Weed to move straight to the final battle, skipping the need to activate the levers above. Starting off in the fight, Weed attacks Dooku whilst moving to the left. After 3 hearts are gone, Dooku will move into the next phase where he will use the force and throw objects at you. However, if you are far enough away from him, he will retaliate with a diving attack. When you enter the Dooku fight, the post-fight cutscene is already loaded in and can be triggered by hitting a transition, as the transition is essentially a trigger to load in the most recent event, which is the post-fight cutscene. Luckily enough, by being pushed through this door here with Dooku's attack, you successfully trigger the transition, which loads the post-fight cutscene, ending the level. If there is any negative part of the speedrun, it unfortunately is the next level, Battle over Corruscant. This mission is a 4-minute auto-scroller, and there is almost no way of speeding this mission up. I will quickly show you, however, that the main ways of speeding up this level is by pushing the ship into the corners where the camera will turn. By having 2 players activated whilst using this method, the camera will turn quicker, saving a few seconds. Back to normality again, we are now in Chancellor and Peril, the most broken level in the run, and right away you will see an out of bounds performed by clipping into the collision of the fighter, pushing Anakin through the floor. You are then able to head straight to the next room transition. A transition skip is performed here right away. Near the end of the room, Weed infinitely jumps up to reach the room transition, which does extend underneath the floor. The next wrong warp is done in this area by pushing Obi-Wan out of bounds into the tunnel as it begins loading in the scene for the Dooku fight. By then using Anakin to jump into the transition, it wrong warps to the cutscene before the Dooku battle. The Dooku fight starts out with a pound attack from the second player, whilst also dropping him out at the same time. Weed is waiting for a visual cue, being the red aura around Obi-Wan, which indicates Dooku is chasing him down. By then slashing the bomb and continuing to move to the left, similar to the Jango fight in Jedi Battle, Dooku will die instantly to the bomb as he ran into the hitbox. After the cutscene, we will switch to Saeed, who does a wrong warp to the next area. A drop-in warp is done here, to skip all the movement done in this runway. Another wrong warp is done in the next room, by activating 2 players and doing a slash attack with Anakin whilst dropping him out at the same time, pushing him behind the transition. This now loads in the scene for the Grievous fight, and by simply having Obi-Wan trigger the scene transition, the wrong warp is successfully performed. The level ends with Weed using both players to finish off the droids in the control room, then using the force to pull the lever to end the level. This next level has evolved a lot over the years, and returning to it once again, I have learned that there is a new change to how this fight is done. Weed starts off by moving the trooper onto the stone platform where the mini-kit is, then facing the center platform. By then shooting Grievous as the trooper, and then jumping off the platform with Obi-Wan, the game cannot load the next phase of the fight, as none of the characters are in the spawn location to make this happen. By repeating this method, you are able to defeat Grievous while skipping all the other phases of the fight. Now arriving at Defense of Kashyyk, Weed is now playing as Yoda, a very unique character in the game who has different types of movement based on the state he is in. Summoning the lightsaber is the best course of action when moving around with him. After arriving at the big tree, we will see the first use of a trick known as Yoda flies. When performing a downward slash at the completion of the animation, you have a window to perform a jump right after. By looping this sequence together, you can extend the distance you need to jump, or in this case, by doing a Yoda fly against the sloped surface, can increase your height. Once Weed has built enough height, she will traverse through the area, following along the footpaths and climbing over the barriers, skipping areas which require saving Wookiees from enemies. Once over at the next tree, you need to rebuild some more height before flying to the end of the area. Weed quickly moves Yoda through the beach, stopping and using the force on a plant to activate the grapple for Chewbacca. Whilst this is happening, Weed turns on 2 players and moves Chewbacca next to the grapple location before quickly dropping out player 2 and switching to Chewbacca, performing a cool jump shot on the last target to open the door to the next area. Speeding past the next room, Weed will now perform another transition skip. Since Yoda jumps whenever he moves, he will begin infinitely jumping towards the surface. By using a slash attack and descending again, Weed has the ability to control Yoda from clipping back in bounds. The rest of the level plays out rather stock standard, clearing some enemies and using the Force to complete the level. Starting off from Ruin of the Jedi, Saeed switches to Yoda and pulls out the lightsaber for faster movement speed. Another wrong warp which is only done in Saeed's run will be showcased here. By moving out of bounds, then falling into the void, the camera will reset you on an angle where both the door to the first area and the Jedi Temple can both be seen. Player 2 is then activated and heads near the transition to the first area. By then performing 3 Yoda flies to the left, Yoda will fall into the void once more. What happens now is that due to the camera being stuck, you don't die but auto drop out instead, as you just get out of the camera's range. So when the game decides to drop Yoda back in, the only reasonable place is the Jedi Council area, which then loads the room, allowing the wrong warp to then be performed. Another new method is then done in the following room. Rather than performing a transition skip, instead it has been figured out that you can jump into the wall whilst on the mechanical arm. You are then able to drop and warp the second player past the wall and into the final room transition. With precise positioning, you can use the Force on the wheel without being interrupted by the troopers to end the level. Arriving at the last level of episode 3 is Darth Vader, which is a more simple level. Weed starts off doing a drop in warp which sends him into the next room, avoiding the room transitions. Once Anakin spawns back in, Weed jumps onto the pillar in a very specific spot and uses the Force, which clips her through the roof, successfully reaching the scene transition. The next area is very straightforward, cooperating with Anakin to move along the pathway. By moving next to the steam, you are able to use the Force on the lever. The next area is very straightforward, jumping to each platform and avoiding the lava. In the final battle, jump slashes are the most efficient way to output damage. After the cutscene, Weed chooses to save the game and then quits out and reloads the game as it's faster than watching the cutscene. After spawning back in Dex's diner, Weed traverses to the final level of the run. It is possible to switch to Yoda inside the diner, which saves some time and movement speed, but it's purely luck based. Right at the start of the level, we will see a skip performed by jumping onto the light. The hitbox does extend underneath the light, so by landing in that area, you are able to pixel jump onto the light, then across to the other side. Switching to Saeed, we see him traverse along the bottom area rather than the higher up platforms. By jumping onto the slightly indented panels in the wall, you are able to platform up to the pathway to the next area, while skipping the need to use the Force on the movable platforms. Weed will now perform the final wrong warp in the run. She starts off by performing a transition skip, then falling out of bounds. Once outside the level, she lands onto a floor where she is able to walk along the surface. Next, Weed will drop in player 2, aiming to get a specific camera angle to make the wrong warp possible. Once player 1 has moved far enough away from the camera then unlocks, allowing it to stay still with player 2. Now with the camera unlocked, Weed can move player 1 to the right, loading in the hallway area and allowing the wrong warp to then be performed. This skip is very difficult, but saves the player quite a bit of time, avoiding having to fight the droids. Switching back to Saeed for the last time, we see a unique drop-in strat done in the hallway, which skips the need of using the Force on each of the levers. I believe the way this trick works is by moving player 2 back, and by then jumping onto the lever and performing a ground pound attack, the player is extended so far up in the air that player 2 is no longer visible in the camera's view, which then drops the player back in the nearest location, which is behind the barrier. Now in the final battle, Weed starts off by clearing some of Darth Maul's hearts. In the second phase, Weed moves along the arena in a specific way to efficiently force the objects onto Maul. You might have noticed Weed has turned on 2 players for this battle. The reason this is done is to speed up the final phase of the fight. Maul is invincible until he uses the Force on one of the players, and by having both players active, he will loop this cycle more efficiently than with one player. The timer ends when the final strike lands on Maul, and Weed achieves a 56.25, the current world record at the time of this recording. I hope this video gave some insight into this wonderful speedrun. I want to personally thank Weed and Saeed, who both assisted me with the script, as many of the new tricks were difficult to grasp at first. If you wish to learn the speedrun for yourself, links will be provided below to the leaderboards, which will provide all resources and guides required to learn the game. I am aiming to release more content like this throughout the remaining parts of the year, so if you wish to support me in my journey, a link to my Patreon can be found below. Anyways, that is all for now. I am Saiyanz, and thank you for watching.